Which pig won when two pigs fought? The man answered that the pig won. Everyone present was stunned. He was the first person in the world to answer correctly, and thus became the President of the United States. It turned out that years later, the average IQ of Americans dropped significantly, because smart people were too busy working to have children, while people with lower IQs were keen on reproducing. So years later, Americans' IQ dropped dramatically. To address this crisis, the government planned to put two intelligent people into hibernation, and wake them up 10 years later. To save Americans from the IQ crisis, David and Lucy were chosen as the first test subjects. The government promised generous compensation after 10 years, so they entered the hibernation pods. But, unexpectedly, the only person who knew about this plan was arrested for a crime. The experiment was completely forgotten. Years later, the lab was demolished. The hibernation pods were discarded as trash. 500 years later, due to population explosion, garbage piled up like mountains with no one to handle it. As the last can fell from the garbage truck, the mountain of trash suddenly collapsed. Massive amounts of garbage rushed into the city like a tsunami. David's hibernation pod was washed into Paul's house. The pod happened to open. David woke up. Paul, who was learning that 1 + 1 = 2, was interrupted. He stood up angrily, and threw David out the window. David was completely baffled. He decided to go to the hospital for a checkup, but the hospital's billboard looked ridiculous. After entering the hospital, he found that people there weren't very bright. Even the robots were the same. David wanted to register. The nurse stared at the cartoon icons for a long time, finally randomly picked one. David was arranged for an examination. The doctor gave him 3 metal rods, one for the mouth, one for the ear, another for the buttocks. Just as David positioned them, the doctor said he made a mistake and needed to switch them. The one just misplaced should go in the mouth. David was completely speechless. After the examination, he immediately ran to rinse his mouth. Later, in a magazine, he discovered it was now 2525. He realized he had been in hibernation for 500 years. He ran to the window and pulled open the curtains. The buildings outside were crooked. The ones about to fall were tied up with ropes. Cars were still driving on broken bridges. David was shocked by the scene before him. At night, he went to a vending machine. Suddenly 2 police officers rushed out. Before he could explain, he was tackled. David was taken to court. Although the judge didn't seem very bright, he still arranged a lawyer for him. Surprisingly, the lawyer was Paul, who hadn't learned that 1 + 1 = 2. Paul was quite eloquent. He even helped the opposing lawyer accuse David of being guilty. Finally, the judge made his decision. David was found guilty, sentenced to 10,000 years.